Alrighty, everybody. Welcome back. SF Live, episode 196. It is still Monday. This is our fourth interview today. For some reason, it's jam-packed today, but the information could not be better that you'll be receiving from us today. In a few short seconds, I'll be joined by Matt Watson. He's a founder, managing partner at Precious Metals Commodity Management, and we're going to talk clean energy transition. What does it mean for the metals? How should you position yourselves? What metals are hot? What are not? What should you be looking out for? Supply and demand. Lots to talk about. Let's see if we can all pack it into a 20-minute, 25-minute conversation here with Matt, and really curious to pick his brain on that as well. Before we do that, before we switch over to our guest, be reminded two things. A, we are an interactive format. We are live, as you've known. Make sure to get your questions in format, either via YouTube chat or at Twitter. You can use the hashtag function AskPMCM, and make sure to do that as well. We'll monitor throughout the conversation, so make sure to do that. And then, of course, follow us on YouTube, us on Twitter. Hit the like and subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on the bell notification. I'm getting tired of saying this, but we do all our interviews live. Make sure to join us for them. And you get a push notification sent either to your phone or in your browser when we go live. So don't miss them. It is your advantage over just watching the replay. Trying to make that as accessible as possible. Now, making somebody else accessible is our friend and Matt Watson. Matt, I really appreciate you joining us. And thanks for coming on the program.
Kai, thanks for having me.
That's great. I watched your presentation at one of the industry conferences. Oh, it's 4 months ago, something like that. It feels like forever ago, but I was really, really intrigued by your analysis, and it was really clear-headedness, no emotion analysis of the clean energy metal space, but also the transition. Before we dive into the details, and you give us a bit more color on what's happening in the markets, tell us more about yourself and tell us more about Precious Metals Commodity Management.
Sure. So I'm an LLC based out here in the Silicon Valley in beautiful California. Largely grew up in the electronics industry and picked up precious metals responsibility in the hard disk drive industry, and basically haven't left the precious metal space since, now for some 20 years. I've really expanded my portfolio as I look at these clean energy transitions. I'm looking more at copper, obviously the lithium battery elements, and looking at this clean energy transition in general. Keep in mind, the International Energy Agency and IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agencies, are calling for a huge infusion of variable renewables into our power grids. They're both calling for basically a tripling of our global power grids. We're going to electrify everything, right? Vehicles and the whole bit. And with that, a lot of metals are going to be pulled along for the ride. And really, that's the core message. And we could talk about silver, especially as it relates to solar. We could talk about copper as it relates to pretty much anything, wind, solar, electronics. We could talk about platinum group metals. Emission control is a hot topic today on ICE vehicles. So platinum, rhodium, and palladium are very hot now. And then in the future, with the hydrogen economy, there's going to be some transition. It's going to be about platinum, ruthenium, and iridium.
What was the second one there?
Iridium and ruthenium.
Ruthenium. Okay, we have to talk about ruthenium because I can't even pronounce it.
Yeah, so these are PGM minor metals. These are little byproducts that come along for the ride when you mine PGMs in South Africa. And so each of these metals, including all the lithium battery metals, are all going to be taxed. And all these clean energy advocates think we're just going to flip a switch and scale BEVs and scale solar and scale the grid. It's not going to go off as planned, people. There just aren't enough minerals on deck in our reserves to be able to do this. And there's not enough appetite for mining investment right now. And so I think, when you listen to a range of analysts talking about whether it be copper, any one of these metals, they're all staged for a super cycle. They're all going to continue to climb. The fundamentals are just going to keep pushing these things higher and higher as we progress down this clean energy transition. So it's that simple.
Oh, there's a lot happening. The prices already have run up higher earlier this year. It looks like they're taking a bit of a summer breather. It looks like they all went on vacation, and we'll be back hopefully in the fall. Run us through the sentiment right now. It looks like it all started in January with a new U.S. president in the White House.
Right.
Was that the trigger? And is that now why people are believing in the clean energy transition there?
Well, I think the Europeans are actually far ahead of the U.S. in pushing this agenda. For example, on the hydrogen economy, the hydrogen market today is about $169 billion market. Well, they've already committed $300 billion in funding for green hydrogen production. That's a pretty large price tag, and that illustrates pretty heavy commitment, if in my mind, right? That no, this isn't a joke. This is quite
Yeah.
serious. And then, like I said, there's three primary PGM metals: platinum, this ruthenium, and iridium, that are going to be pulled along for the ride, that are used extensively in that space. And simply, there's not going to be enough of those metals to do what they have plans to do. And I feel like this, what we're lacking is fundamental supply chain management. Nobody's doing the math. Nobody's adding up the demand. It just,
Yes.
right. I mean, we've got to highlight the gaps earlier so that we can lay out a roadmap that makes more sense. And that's what we're missing in my mind, right? Batteries as well. People think that we're going to transition to electric vehicles so rapidly, right? That we'll be doing 50 million BEVs by 2030. I think there's a real problem getting even to 25, 26 million by then. Um, Nickel, we were talking earlier about clean nickel, lithium, cobalt, graphite, and copper as well are all potentially constraining that environment. So on how fast they can go. So
Here, I'm going to ask you a question. I've got to close the door because, of course, the gardener is in the background of the neighbors. So I'm not sure if you can hear that, but I can hear it very loudly. There's a leaf blower or something going. But explain the hydrogen economy. Like, I just came back from Europe, and hydrogen is not a word I've seen thrown around, especially when you said Europe. So I'd really like to understand, like, what do you mean by that, and in what direction, and where will we be using hydrogen?
sure. So one of the bigger problems, let's shut the door. One of the bigger problems we have as we propagate more variable renewables, wind and solar, is that they aren't on all the time. That, during the daytime, you're going to be generating solar power. And yet the peak power demand is in the evening from about 4 p.m. to about 10 p.m. at night in most countries around the world. And one of the big questions is, how are we going to store energy that we generate during the daytime to meet the peak evening demand? And then even on a seasonal basis, how do we meet the hot days in summer and the coldest days in winter? And so we're going to need a large scale energy storage mechanism. And hydrogen is one of the best technologies out there to do this. If you could generate hydrogen, find a place to store it, and then be able to productively turn it around and generate it from gas back into power, which we can do, that is the best vehicle to get there. In my view, by the way, it's not going to be the hydrogen economy. I think as we get closer to really propagating this, it's going to be ammonia, which is just a denser form of hydrogen. Instead of H2, two hydrogen molecules, ammonia is NH3, three hydrogen molecules. So it's 50% more dense than hydrogen. Easier to transport, easier to store. And so one thing that we've realized that we can do on a small scale today is we could generate this fuel, hydrogen, with no CO2 footprint. In refining and making fossil fuels into gasolines and the products that we can burn, you spend a lot of energy, a lot of heat intensive operations, and you have a CO2 footprint even when making the fuel. And then when you burn the fuel in a car or something, of course, you're emitting more emissions there as well. So hydrogen has an advantage. You can create it in a green fashion with no CO2 footprint. And then when you burn it, there's absolutely no CO2 contributions as well. So it's clean during the creation. It can be clean during the burning of it. So that's the pros for this. And again, it has a large capability in terms of storage if we could find a means to store this effectively. And so that's kind of the carrot, if you will. That's the $1 trillion carrot on the energy storage on a grid level scale.
Interesting. Like, I like to go down a rabbit hole here for a second. And
Sure.
why don't we see it more in vehicles? Like, I think only Toyota has a hydrogen vehicle that's somewhat mass market capable, right? I forgot the name of it. It starts with an M, I think.
Yeah, the Toyota Mirai. Until recently, there's the Honda Clarity, although Honda's going to take the Clarity off the market. They just announced. And the biggest seller is out of Hyundai, the South Koreans. They have a Nexo, kind of a small SUV. There's only some 8,000 of these sold last year globally. Although there was some 8,000 sold in the first quarter of this year. The rates of these sales are picking up. Part of the problem is having a hydrogen refueling network available to refill your car, obviously, is one of the problems. They're expensive early. The cost will come down. I'm not so worried about that. The biggest concern I have for transportation is twofold. One, getting the cost of the hydrogen retail down. For example, in California, we have some 50 refueling stations here in California, but the average price is about $16 a kilogram. for hydrogen. A kilogram gets you about 70 miles in a car in one of these
What
vehicles.
did
Like
you say? $16?
$16. And so but when you work the numbers, it's about 2 times higher than gasoline. They got to get the price at retail cheaper. And the big dilemma is they could create the gas cheap, but transporting it as a gas in tankers is very inefficient and very costly. And so they blow 40 to 60% of that price is just in transportation, getting it to where it needs to go. And so they're trying to come up with a means of delivering it much cheaper. You can freeze it, put it in liquid hydrogen form, or a liquid organic hydrogen carrier, or even an ammonia, and transport it a little bit cheaper. And those are the technologies that they're looking at that will involve PGMs, my three magic platinum group metals, that can help enable to change and alter that cost curve. The other creative idea that they're looking at, and sounds crazy, is our natural. Now there goes that. There goes the yard work again. Um, the other crazy idea they're talking about is using our natural gas pipelines that are already plumbed underground all the homes and businesses. That's methane, that's natural gas. But they could put hydrogen in a mixture form into that pipeline. In California, in Connecticut, in Germany, in Japan, they've done trials in the range of like 4 to 8% composition of hydrogen. And then it could be distributed through that pipeline network that already exists, and then you can re-extract it even in a pure form at the point of use where you need it. And so that could become a vehicle for both storage, just in millions of miles of pipeline, transport on the cheap. And so that's an interesting idea that they're looking at. The only problem there is some of the pipes are not compatible with hydrogen. It will have a corrosion or an embrittlement impact on pipes over time. And so some of the older cast iron pipes would be a problem in that situation. So that's one of the hangups that they're looking at in that sort of a system. In Australia, though, they're being much more aggressive. They're targeting 20% composition of hydrogen in their natural gas pipelines. And the idea they want to target smelters and some of the high energy, big CO2 footprint industrial applications first, things like steel mills, ammonia plants, and get them to use hydrogen as a fuel source for their chemistry and their operations. And I think the pipeline approach actually probably makes the most sense. It's just a question about compatibility with pipeline materials is really the big last hurdle that they're looking at. And this has already been tried. It's already been done. It's been done in several countries already on a small scale. Now, can it work on a terawatt level scale on a national grid? Question mark, right? That's a big risk. And when you think about what we're doing, we're going to go to variable renewables at a huge rate. Boy, you better have some strategy that works, that can level out your energy, right? Or you need it again. Peak is in the evening, or those hot summer days or whatever. That's when you're going to need it, right? And how do you store it and pull it and extract it when you need it, when the variable renewables are not on? So that's
It's like you're based in LA and you got to turn off your air conditioning because you're running peak power,
yeah.
right? So that just doesn't work.
Well, yeah, I'm a Californian. So growing up here, for years they would even run commercials. Turn off your washer and dryer during the daytime. Well, now that we have so much solar installed in California, that's exactly the wrong message. Clean energy advocates don't like to talk about this, but on most days in California, they're turning the solar off because they have too much. I kid you not. And I could point you at the right websites that you look at our system grid operators. They publish it live online. It's called curtailed renewable power. And it's this big percentage of the renewables that they're turning off. Why is it? Well, it ends up the existing natural gas power plants. You can't turn them off and on like a light switch quick enough to take advantage of all the solar that you're generating. You can turn them off quick, but it might take you 3 weeks to turn it back on, and so you're screwed, right? You gotta have a system that you could quickly re-enable. And so as a result, the only thing they can throttle down is a lot of the solar, and that's in fact what they're doing. And so we have excess renewable energy. Again, the idea: generate hydrogen during the daytime with all that excess, don't waste it. But coming up with an energy storage scheme, that's the key question, and that's what the hydrogen economy is all about. I hope that helps.
It really does, because we went down a deep rabbit hole, but I think it was quite enlightening to me as well, because it's not a topic that you see in mainstream media. It's lithium ion all over, but nobody really talks about hydrogen. You said there's big budgets behind it, but it's not really at the forefront of anybody's minds.
And,
right?
and keep it simple. If we're going to do so much renewable energy, and IRENA by 2050, they want 75% of the global power grids to be basically renewable energy. Boy, you're banking a lot on this thing. What is going to be your storage medium again, of seasonal and time of day to hit your peak and meet those demands? Or are you just going to have frequent brownouts and turn the power off for everybody?
Try to
Which of
sell
course,
that at 60 cents a kilowatt hour to people,
exactly.
right? So that won't work. So interesting. Okay, that's an interesting avenue. Let's look at the metals though. Like,
Okay.
and actually, before we look at it, let's talk about the infrastructure package first before we look at the metals itself. Over the weekend, we've seen numbers throwing around again, a $6 trillion infrastructure package. How much of that is going to go into green energy, into the green energy initiative, and how actually you see that playing out? And where is the money going to make an impact, and where do you think it's going to flow?
Remember a few years back during political seasons, we'd hear them talk about the Green New Deal being a $30 trillion roughly package. It's actually going to be probably even more. And I think they've gotten away from talking about it in a lump sum package total. I think now the plan is globally about 3 to 4 trillion a year, every year, and they're just going to dose it in. Is pretty much the view that certainly the Europeans have, and of course you're hearing that in the U.S. as well. It is a huge investment that's going to be needed, and again, I just wish we had a plan that was proven more clearly. Um, I'm all for engineering. I'm all for very targeted extraction of minerals to support the cause. But we're just too disconnected at this point, in my mind. We don't have a cohesive plan that goes all the way down to the mineral requirements to support the initiatives. And that's evident. I mean, even in the investment community, there's just not enough investment in the mining and junior mining space right now. We need more of all this stuff. For the hydrogen economy, it's all about the platinum group metals, and there you're talking South Africa. I'm fully on board with tripling or more the amount of PGMs that we're mining in South Africa. It's there. It's in the reserves. We know where it's at. It's not a question of abundance. It's just unfortunately a mile or a mile and a half deep. Some of the most complex mining on the planet. I'm all for doing that. Some of these others, like copper, boy, it's a big ask. We're doing about 22 million tons a year right now. My calculations, I was just going through my supply demand outlook for 2050. We need to be to the mid 50 millions by 2050 on my low case, mid 60 millions a year high case to enable zero energy transition topics that they're all talking about, right? It's just, and the appetite isn't there for that level of expansion.
Yeah.
Um, and that's my hangup is and then even the Biden administration. There was a couple of articles that came out about a week ago where the Biden administration's, on this topic of critical minerals, will we mine it ourselves? And the administration official was quoted as saying, "Not in my backyard. Anybody can dig a hole." It's like, oh, come on, right?
Like that's yeah. They
You
want it
know,
all, but they don't want to give up anything. It's interesting, right?
and when
It,
you look at who owns the mining, it's China. Who owns the processing? It's China. China has their name all over this map, and it's true. You need cobalt. The Chinese have not been shy about going and buying the biggest cobalt mines out of the Republic of Congo, which is a country is a mess and an environmental social justice nightmare that's continuing in that country. But they don't care. They just go buy it. If they need nickel, they'll just go buy out Indonesian mines. They'll mine the nickel and they'll dump the mine tailings into the coral reef region there in the Indonesian archipelago. We've got to be more mindful about how we're doing this, be more socially responsible in the CO2 footprint in the mining and the processing. And that's where this discussion of even clean nickel is coming from, right?
no, that's a good point. Clean nickel, actually, and then you mentioned Indonesia and Elon Musk asking for clean nickel as well.
Yeah.
Where's it supposed to? I mean, what is actually clean nickel?
So Elon Musk, by the way, in the Q2 financials last year in the COVID 2020, that's when he started making noise about, I will sign a long-term contract today for responsibly mined and clean nickel. And this comes in the face of reports from Papua New Guinea and Indonesia where mines are dumping their mine tailings into the oceans, right, in that coral reef zone. He's not playing ball with that. And he had conversations with the Indonesian government. No, we can't do this. You got to stop this tailing dumping. And the other problem is in the nickel space, only about 40% of the nickel is battery grade capable. You can't have iron in your nickel. Unfortunately, 60% of the nickel mined has iron. It's called a nickel pig iron. And that's a lot of the ore bodies coming from Indonesia, where so much of the reserves, about 25% of the global reserves, is at. So you can't have the iron. So what do you do to get rid of the iron? Well, you add more CO2 footprint. You have to do a whole extra smelting step just to get rid of that iron. Some experts that I'm interacting with are saying you're adding another 90 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere for every 1 ton of nickel mined with that incremental step. It's a ridiculous amount of emissions. And so, where are you doing this? Well, we're doing it in a region in Indonesia with a coal-based grid, or the Chinese have been loading up ships and taking it off to China, where they're putting it on their coal-based grid. And keep in mind, China just secured over 1 billion tons of its next coal block, and they're building 350 more coal-fired power plants in country. Is this really the path that we want our battery minerals to be made with in these very dirty processes? And, I tick off clean energy advocates, but I'm dead serious when I say this. You can process the BEV battery minerals in such a dirty way and recharge it with a coal-based grid. I'm convinced that's actually a dirtier emission than the gasoline vehicles. To make these BEVs really distinguished versus gasoline, you have to have a cleaner grid, more renewables, more nuclear. You need other ways to charge it and process those minerals to make it distinguished. Otherwise, we're just spinning our wheels on a lot of minerals that aren't really going to create a big CO2 rate of change, frankly.
Yeah, and a question I didn't get in before because we jumped straight to clean nickel is like Japan and I think South Korea also, they have like government investment agencies like a JOGMEC or so that invest on behalf of the government. Do you see that being created in the US as well, saying, hey, here's $5 billion to build this copper mine in Arizona, for example?
Right.
Do you see that being created and developed?
Um,
Would
it's
that be a
unfair.
way that would actually make sense to actually further and strengthen the investment into, let's say, junior mining, as you're saying, is lacking, and copper is a great example because at least it takes 10 years to bring something online, at least.
Yeah, and the timeline's getting longer and longer with
Exactly.
more and more regulatory hurdles. So this is where I think there's going to be a step function shift. One is you're going to see more streaming companies and royalty companies making mints, right? The people with funding, billions and trillions of dollars of funding that know where to put that egg, they're going to continue to make money. So they're going to be a part of the funding solution. These privately held groups, like Wheaton, or there's a number of other royalty groups. The other thing that we're going to see is we're going to see more Apples and more Teslas and some of the larger organizations, I think, vertically integrate. They're not going to have a choice. They're going to need to be more in control of their own mining space to create the metals, to create the electronic products that we're begging for, right? And nobody make a mistake. All these electronics, everything from our handhelds, the iPads, to the vehicles, they're computers on wheels now, right? It's all about the chips. And geographic, there's just too much control that's regionally managed and has Chinese influence on it. We need to create some of this ecosystems in our own backyards if this is really the path that we want to go. Right? You got to
Yeah.
want it.
No, that makes sense. And we with Mountain Pass in California, I think that was the first step to get that restarted as well. Is that correct?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
fantastic. Let's put a bow around it. Like, what are you like in your subscribers and your service packages? Like, what are you recommending right now in terms of like metals? Is there like one metal that jumps out and says, okay, there's a shortage tomorrow? Like, and I'm being a little facetious here, like a little exaggerating here, right? But is there something that would be extremely critical?
I think palladium still has more legs. I think you're going to see it past 3,000 to about 3,500 before it is going to finally get to a surplus state closer to 2030. Copper is going to continue, I think, year over year, just a consistent climb. Silver, I'm not a William Devane advocating $200 silver on commercials, but I'll tell you what, by 2050, $200 silver is well within sight. But I think it's going to be a slow, almost straight line, 8% CAGR type of a growth rate. I don't think it's going to jump dramatically overnight. But on the long haul, silver, copper, the nickels, even lithium, they're all going to be challenged and become more expensive, no doubt about it. Rare earths, metals you never hear, scandium, I have a whole hit list of other interesting metals, and the rares are part of that.
Uh,
Uh, yeah,
yeah, no, I have to admit, like I'm mostly like in the precious metal space, meaning gold, silver, copper, and base metals to that degree, right? Like that's our space. That's SF Live. Most companies we interview,
yeah,
ruthenium. Don't ask. Like I don't think I've ever interviewed a company that had ruthenium as part of a buy credit or something, right? So,
right, right, right. Well, that
um,
was my first entry into precious metals was ruthenium and platinum with Seagate, with the hard disk drive industry, where ruthenium was a key component. And I picked up a $500 million worth of responsibility on ruthenium and platinum. And yeah, I learned quite a bit about that market. Drove it to nearly $900 a troy ounce, and it's doing it again. It's spiked. It's about doubled in the past 4 months. Iridium, another crazy little metal you never hear about. It's more than tripled since December. So these are products you're not going to find an ETF on. Very difficult to invest in unless you're willing to hold, speculative positions in a vault or in your garage, right? And some people do. But yeah, the platinum group metals, I think, really have an attractive outlook, and there'll be a dramatic shift. I think palladium is going to continue to climb, but about 2030, you're going to start to see it fold over and go into surplus. But I think the platinum, this ruthenium, and iridium will become the hot ticket longer term. And so,
Matt, I could be chatting with you for another hour easily because
yeah,
we haven't even talked on the chip shortage and what kind of metals are involved in that as well. Why
sure.
why is there a chip shortage? But we have to catch up another time. We hit the time
Not a
limit.
problem. God,
Unfortunately, it's a great, like, eye-opening conversation on the hydrogen economy for me as well. It was great having you on the program. Thanks for your time. Like, I really
yeah,
appreciate you being so generous with it.
you bet.
And actually, you run a newsletter as well. You do some advisory services as well. Where can
Yeah.
we find more about you?
Go to my website, preciousmetals.com, and you'll find links there. You can sign up for the newsletters, which is basically just a news aggregation, but more with an engineering mindset, is looking forward. What's the next hot thing? And feel free to reach out and contact me. You'll see my information there and contact information. And please, if you want to dig deeper, I'll help you dig deeper.
Fantastic. Matt, really appreciate your time. Thanks for catching up. And let's catch up again soon before the chip shortage comes to an end. And
Yeah,
maybe you can send me information
don't
where I
worry.
can find a new graphic card.
You got a couple years of chip shortage, so don't worry. It's not going away soon.
Okay, perfect. All righty. Appreciate. No, actually, I'm a bit worried because I need a new graphics card. I've said that before. I'm in the
Yeah,
market for a new graphics card now. I'm not paying scalper prices, so
yeah, yeah.
curious to see what's happening there.
Yeah, it's all about Taiwan.
True.
It's all about Taiwan and Team SC. So yeah. Anyway,
Interesting. Awesome. Matt, thanks so much. Everybody else, thanks for tuning in. SF Live, episode 196 already. And this was an interesting one. We talked about something completely off, like SF Live's focus. I learned a lot and really appreciate Matt sharing his thoughts here on the hydrogen economy, talking about shortages in metals and much, much more. Make sure to follow us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. Turn on that little bell notification as well. We do all our interviews live. That way you do have an advantage. And you're a bit ahead of the replay crowd, so make sure to use that. And we'll be back with more interviews tomorrow. My tongue is getting tired. It's been a lot of interviews today. Really appreciate it, Matt.